Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the session on the American workforce. I am Zeynep from MIT Sloan School of Management and the nonprofit Good Jobs Institute. And we thought the best way to start a session on the American workforce would be to hear from the American workforce itself. So let's hear from a few workers in the United States and their experience, and then we'll start our conversation.
I'm Patrick, and I'm from Marion, North Carolina.
My name is Johnny. I live in Jackson, Mississippi.
My name is Eviled. I live in Los Angeles.
My name is Eddie. I live in Harrisonburg, Virginia.
The pandemic kind of caused our business to suffer a little bit as well. A lot of our clients that we deal with shut down, and so we had to kind of adapt to our environment and what was going on. And so we kind of joined in on the PPE initiative and actually signed a contract with the government to produce masks and kind of be the courier for those masks. So there was always work. Our company did a really good job of adapting and kind of morphing into what our community needed at the time, and what we needed at the time to stay working. So there was no like real gap of work.
After talking to other people, friends, and my doctor, I was convinced that the best thing for me to do was to take a break. My employer was wonderful. They gave me a 4-month leave of absence. While I was on the absence, they kept me. My insurance was still active the whole time. They let me have my benefits at work. I still got my discounts, and I was treated extremely fair.
No, I didn't get no type of support from my employer because he said they didn't have any assistance programs or anything for their employees. I didn't have any income coming in. And the stimulus, when the stimulus hit, I was able to catch up on 3 months of rent, and that helped me. And then I have a community specialist here at the apartment. One time she was able to get me some money for me and my daughter to help cope to deal with that time.
As for my employer, I had a lot of support. They provided me with resources of people who I could talk to about like the stress and anxiety that was weighing on me every day. And for the people who kept working, we actually received bonuses. My work granted me, a leave of absence. So I was able to take the time to, allow her to have her baby and not get her sick. But also I was able to receive government support in the form of unemployment for the course of that month. So that was huge. That helped me stay financially stable.
So for me, being able to still work from home was a way for my employer to support me, and also just providing me different tasks that I could do from home, just because a lot of the work that I do has to be on site. But I think that we will kind of just, adjust and provide like trainings, provide workshops. So just being able to have that childcare and know that I have it kind of gave me that peace of mind to be able to just leave my daughter in a safe space and for me to be able to get work done at the site. And also I know they were really great at providing like food resources. So that was very helpful just because the money that I would have spent, in food, I was able to kind of just, save it for like an actual, like maybe a car emergency.
Fortunately, the government was great and was able to get unemployment, which I didn't know that I would be able to in the beginning. I got it, and I was able to get the extra $600 a week, which was incredible. I kept my insurance, was incredible. I mean, they didn't have to do that. I was not there for 4.5 solid months, and they let me continue on with my benefits, it saved me.
Just being able to continue to work and have the stability, that consistency, I think helps me enough already.
For the most part, I feel really financially stable right now, and I feel like long term I will be financially stable, and that's just due to my work. We have, amazing benefits. Our dental's covered, we have vision insurance. We also have 18 days of PTO, and I am paid about 3x the minimum wage. Also, I'm working towards being a worker owner by the end of this year. So, and that entails, surplus sharing and having a stake of the company that I work for.
Roles were overlapping. I was a mother, I was a teacher assistant, but I was also a worker. At the same time, I was an intern. So just to have all that kind of just come together was very overwhelming for me. But I think for me specifically, just being able to talk to somebody about it, whether it was my coach or whether it was a coworker or a family or a relative, just being able to process those overwhelming feelings for me was very, it was a way to overcome this, right?
It was kind of hard because I was mandatory to come to work. And at this time, my daughter's school shut down. So I didn't really have no one to be at home with her to help with her schoolwork, and I had to get internet. I know I have to work. So what made it easier for me is having a place to take my baby, my daughter, somewhere she can be on a computer virtual. I just tried. I had to quit my job, to help my baby because I want to give her a better education. The government should give employees like some type of system for their employees just in case another pandemic hit, and so they can better assist their employees because most of us are essential workers.
I was in my graduate program, so I was kind of in between internships. Luckily, with my first one, I was able to do in person, and then I had to transition to virtual. But for my second internship, I ended up doing a whole year of just virtual. I love both my internships, but my second one, I feel like with my second internship, I didn't fully get to experience that training that I needed.
We do a thing called the Great Game of Business, which kind of takes a deep dive into our finances and looks at the numbers behind what we do. And it kind of rejuvenated my love for numbers. I'm a math nerd in a sense. So it made me want to go back to school to get a degree in statistics. But once COVID hit, things like that kind of just go to the back of your mind because you really don't know what's going to happen. So fear and uncertainty come to the forefront.
I wanted to complete my MBA program where I was trying to work and save so I can pay for my last 2 classes so I can have my MBA and maybe start my own business or be administrator of a nursing home. My background is in nursing home. I love to take care of people. And so that's what I really want to do. But when the pandemic hit, I couldn't save no money. When it hit, I was out of a job. I wasn't working for at least two months, and I'm saving so I can pay for these last 2 classes so I can finish and get my degree, and then hopefully I can go back to school to get my PhD.
Something that really stood out to me during the pandemic was mental health. So it's something that I don't think I took seriously enough before the pandemic hit. So having things in place, like resources in place to use to kind of help you cope with anxiety or, vent or have somebody to talk to, I think that is so important. And I think a lot of companies overlook that right now.
I do have IRA, which, I don't have a whole lot, but it's helpful. But I know that I can't retire on what I have right now and be comfortable.
I think for me specifically, the pandemic really made me think about my financial stability, right? Or even how much do I have saved for an emergency? Because I was very fortunate not to completely lose my job. But I always think of that what if, right? What if I would have lost my job?
Great. So these experiences, these different voices help us see what Americans value in their work and how they think about the pandemic and its effects going into the future. And we're going to have a conversation about all these issues. I am delighted to be here with Rob Falzon, the Vice Chair of Prudential Financial. Hi, Rob. Nice to see you.
Zeynep. How are you?
I am great. So delighted to be here with you. And Rob, as you look at this video, and I know that Prudential also launched its 13th Pulse of the American Worker Survey. The first one was launched in 2017. As you consider what you have found in the survey and what you see in the voices of these employees who come from different backgrounds, variety of different experiences, they are at different parts of their careers. What do you see as what makes a good job and what workers value from a good job?
Yeah, Zeynep. So these interviews were really compelling, and I think all of us can relate to one or more of the experiences that they shared, as we've all been through this experience of the pandemic. And they're quite representative of what we're hearing in our surveys as well around the important role that jobs play in creating financial resiliency for individuals. It's the fundamental start, the first rung in the ladder to financial resiliency is about having a quote good job, and a good job starts with compensation. I mean, obviously that's important, but it has to go so much further than that. As you heard, a good job is around benefits. And so there are people who had experience with losing their benefits. Eddie had an experience where he actually had his benefits carried while he was on. He was out of work for 4.5 months or whatever he cited, and so that benefit package, and including things like mental health increasingly in that benefits package, is an important component for people to create kind of a safety net around their own well-being, financial well-being. I think the other thing that you tease out from those series of interviews is around the need for jobs to also create durability, the sustainability of the job itself. And so that was around skilling. It was interesting. Zeynep, 3 of the 4 individuals were wanting to or were pursuing some level of ongoing education and had to stop in the pandemic. It's around mobility, having opportunities to try other jobs so that you can actually learn on the job. Most of us actually learn not through the classroom, with all due respect to all the great work that you and your peers do, but we actually learn on the job. We take what we learn in the classroom and apply it on the job, and that's where a lot of the learning occurs. And so having mobility to try different careers so you always remain relevant because you're developing the right skill set is important. And that's, I think, the last element that comes through all of our surveying, and you heard it in these interviews as well. Which is around, you're pursuing education because you need the skills to remain relevant to the workforce on a go-forward basis. And so good jobs are jobs that pay well, that have a benefit package that helps to create financial resiliency, that helps encourage employees to use that benefits package, and then put them in a position where they can continue to learn and experience so they remain relevant from a skilling standpoint to what the jobs are going to evolve to over time.
There is no offense taken at all. Learning on the job is very important. In fact, when I look at the companies that I admire the most, Rob, companies like Costco, they have, they provide careers for their employees, not just jobs. And on-the-job learning and growth over time is a huge driver of what creates a good job for them. When I look at Costco, 100% of managers, close to 100% of their managers are promoted from within.
Yeah.
And that gives a sense for the worker, I can have a career here. I can move up here. No one likes being in their job for that long. So
sort of the churn and burn of hiring people to do the same thing, and then they just burn out, and you just rehire behind them. I'm not sure how sustainable a model that is, and we could talk about that. The one other thing I'd note that I think came also through the interviews, and we very clearly see in our survey, is around flexibility at the workplace as well. And I think we've gotten some taste of that as a result of the pandemic. So people able to work remotely, so they can maintain their jobs while they were working remotely. Now, not all people were able to do that, and you saw that in the interview group. The one woman had to quit her job because they wouldn't allow her to work remotely, and she had to make a decision between educating her daughter and holding on to a job. And those are decisions we don't want to have people have to make. Ideally, you'd want to have some large component of the jobs that Americans can participate in have the level of flexibility that allows them to both from a time and space standpoint, figure out how to work their, balance out the demands of their personal lives and their work lives, particularly during something like a pandemic, which is so stressful on everyone.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we see when we work with companies too. When we ask them, and in your survey, you ask what workers value from a job, and you also ask what's driving talent migration. Why are people leaving jobs? And it seems like what you just mentioned, compensation and benefits, career paths, or being able to learn and grow over time, and work-life balance are important components of a good job, and also the primary drivers of why people leave. And when we work with companies, these are the three biggest things that we often find.
Yeah, and what's interesting is in our own surveying, Zeynep, what we found is oftentimes people cite the reasons they're leaving, and then we ask them the reasons where they're going to, right? And there's an overlap. You would expect that, but the compensation is generally, a number one for why I'm leaving. It sometimes is a driver. But when you then ask them, what are you looking for in your new job? Compensation actually drops down to number 3. Stability in your job is number 1. And stability doesn't mean, I want the same job to last my career. Stability means I want to go to a place where I have a durable career, where I'm going to get the skills, I'm going to get the training, or to remain relevant to the workforce. And we can get into this idea that, as I've said, the skills gap is turning into a skills canyon and for American workers, and that can be a challenge. And the second thing that they cite, as you note, is around flexibility. And then compensation is sort of third. Compensation and benefits is third on that list. I think about skilling and I think about flexibility. Those are new benefits. Employers need to begin to think about as they're trying to attract the best talent in the workplace. They need to think about that as being sort of the part of the benefits package that you're offering to that employee in order to attract them into the platform.
Yep, and it's so interesting what people will say in a survey and what they will do. As you mentioned, we find the exact same thing. We work with multiple companies, and this is slightly different actually. But they get engagement surveys, and they say, wow, our employees are so happy to be here. Our engagement scores are 90%. And then they have 100% employee turnover. And when you look at why is this? And we stopped looking at engagement surveys for that reason. And we find those drivers that you mentioned as biggest drivers. And compensation is not a motivator. We know that. It doesn't engage, it doesn't motivate people, but its absence, the absence of a decent wage where you can take care of your family is a big driver of job dissatisfaction and departure.
Yeah, so that's the reason they leave, right? And then what they're looking for is compensation becomes sort of table stakes at that point. It's not a differentiator. You have to pay competitive compensation. And I know, Zeynep, you've done some terrific research in this area, particularly in sort of the jobs that have typically been minimum wage jobs. And we've also done research in our own experimentation around, how do you take employees that are doing things that they're critical? It wouldn't be being done if it wasn't critical. But oftentimes, you and I have talked about, it's machines can do a lot of the work that workers are doing today, right? And so you don't want them doing the things that you can replace with AI or through automation or other ways of process improvement. You want them focused on the things that are going to create real value for the enterprise. And if you do that, then you can actually pay more because they're creating more value at the end. And so that's sort of, I think, the trick, which is take talent, which is your only really sustainable competitive differentiation in the marketplace, and put it to where it can actually create the most value for the enterprise. Instead of looking at talent as something that does low-level work, think about, how do I enable my talent with the technology to take care of that low-level work and do it in a much better way to free the talent up to actually create a different experience for shoppers in the case of your survey, or for us, our customers that are calling into our call centers and otherwise. So I mean, I think there's a lot to be said there.
Yeah, and one of the first questions actually that was asked from the audience had to do with technology and the future of technology. And I think you framed it very nicely, Rob, that we can see technology as enabler of good jobs, because if we can take out those mundane tasks that are low value added and have the machines those tasks and have our workers, be it in call centers, in healthcare facilities or in retail stores, focus on things that really add value, then we can pay them more. And
if you think about patient experience, right? If you've ever been to the care centers, if your talent was more focused on that patient experience instead of the more mundane tasks that they may be deployed to, free up their time so they can spend more time with the patients, you're going to wind up with a more happy customer base, which obviously does better from the standpoint of then attracting more into your facility versus a competing facility. Zeynep, when I talk about this, I always talk about the myth of humans versus technology, and it truly is a myth, because in my view, it's humans enabled by technology. And it's not that there aren't disruptions, incidentally. I mean, you don't have to go back to the U.S. Great Industrial Revolution to see that, and with the Luddites, and you saw that it doesn't come without transitional pain, absolutely. But I think thoughtful management can think about how do we transition our way to the other side of that. Let's think forward as to what the future skills are that we need, and how do we take our workers today and retrain them to do the things that are going to add value tomorrow. If we're thinking about we're taking these tasks and we can actually automate them, or we can use artificial intelligence to do those tasks. I think if you begin to take that discipline toward how you treat talent, you can then come up with, I think, a win-win for both talent and for the success of the enterprise.
Yeah, we do need to reposition how we think about employees and how we think about the work that they do, and to create highly productive workplaces where people have good jobs. Let me come back to your survey, Rob, to the American workforce, and in terms of, how are the Americans doing? You did this right after the pandemic. I think before the pandemic, American workers already had some issues. But what are some of the things that you find in terms of where is the American workforce?
Well, I'd like to say doing pretty well, but they're not actually. It's actually quite disturbing from that standpoint, and so yeah, we've been serving from before the pandemic and through. And one of the observations is, and I would put it into two general areas. One is around financial resiliency, and then I think the other issue is around skills and being prepared for sort of the work of tomorrow. In terms of sort of other things are coming through the survey, remote work is coming through the survey. We could talk separately about that, but in terms of the condition of the American worker, I think those two themes are coming through loud and clear. So on financial resiliency, here's what's interesting. Just 2 surveys ago, what our survey showed was that it was like 55% of the people that we surveyed realized in the pandemic that they were financially vulnerable before the pandemic even started. It took a pandemic for to shine a light on the vulnerability, but the vulnerability didn't get created in the pandemic. It was there before the pandemic, and the statistics are sort of, they're breathtaking in a way. 2/3 of the individuals surveyed are unable to sustain any kind of a financial emergency. So you heard, I forget, one of the candidates, I think it was, said that I got a little bit of money put away in case my car breaks down. 2/3 of people actually can't sustain that kind of a one-time expenditure, and it was like half have exhausted their emergency savings, and one in four, 25%, were actually in debt. They were running up credit card and other debt as a result of coming through the crisis. And so the crisis exacerbated structural cracks that already existed in the foundation. And I think that's part of what we've come to realize coming through the pandemic. And that gets back to the lack of equity in the workforce, in terms of we've seen that the stress associated with the pandemic was not shared equally by all, and certain segments of the socioeconomic and racial demographic suffered much worse during the pandemic. And so that has to get resolved. I have this saying, I said, we can either prepare or repair. And repairing costs a lot of money, as we're finding out, right? Think about how much money between the Fed and the fiscal, monetary and fiscal stimulus we've had to pump into the economy in order to bail ourselves out of a problem because we're unprepared for it. And so, you have to think about what's the reset that would make that work better in the future. Then that second topic area around skilling, that's an issue where, I think the statistic I remember from our surveys earlier on, as we were going into the pandemic, even before, workers, about 30% of the workers that we surveyed said, actually, I don't think I have the skills that are going to be needed for my job, like in the upcoming year. And if I look forward 5 to 10 years, that number went up to 50% of workers were then concerned about whether they would have skills relevant to the workplace.
Yep.
Surveys now, 50% of the workers today no longer feel like they have the skills that are needed to do their jobs today. So this future of work concept has been, as a result of the pandemic, has been fast forwarded into the current period. And we have a gap with skills that was before the pandemic, and we now have a canyon of skills, a canyon in the skills between the skills that employees have and those that they're going to need in order to remain relevant to the workplace. And that's another issue where I think both private and public sector are going to need to engage.
Yeah, let's take the financial. We talked about skilling before, but the financial resilience a little bit, because as you said, even before the pandemic, there were surveys that 40% of Americans couldn't come up with $400 emergency expense, right? And those long lines outside food banks early in the pandemic, I think, made that statistic really vivid for us. And before the pandemic, again, Brookings Institute found that 44% of the American workforce worked in jobs where the median wage was less than $20,000 an hour. I mean, and 46.5 million Americans work in jobs where the median wage is less than $15 an hour. And $15 seems like a lot of money, but when you look at 40 hours a week, every single week, even if you work that way, $15 an hour is not that much. It comes to $31,200 a year, not enough to be able to have a living in lots of different places in the United States. And this is a huge problem, and it seems like workers want to learn and grow over time. But one of the videos said, I want to learn, but I don't have time. Right? It's not possible anymore, and it seems like workers who are stuck in these jobs find themselves in a vicious cycle. And there's a ton of research now that shows that when you can't make ends meet, you have all sorts of issues. I mean, you have. Somebody mentioned mental health, but financial insecurity has been associated with mental health, physical health, heart disease, suicide, deaths of despair, and then even lower cognitive functioning. And of course, when you are in this state, then you're not able to improve your skills, and you're not able to focus on your work, and you're not able to do a good job, and you don't get promoted, and you find yourself in this vicious cycle. So as you said, we have to find a way to address this problem.
Yeah, I think, as an employer, if you want to be forward-looking and you think about the accelerated pace with which technology and artificial intelligence is being adopted, you have to step back and say, okay, the future of my organization is going to be dependent upon me being able, our leadership being able to implement, significant changes to our business system to remain relevant and competitive in the marketplace. And we're going to need talent to do that. The reality, Zeynep, is with this canyon that started as a gap, you cannot hire your way out of this problem. And it's a problem that you're going to face. I don't care whether you're in the retail industry or whether the insurance industry or other forms of financial services. This is coming at all of us. And so if you adopt an attitude, which is, I'm going to continue to just employ and churn, and not actually invest in skilling, I think what's going to happen is you're going to find that you're not going to be able to hire your way out of this problem, and therefore you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage.
And one of the things that I do want to point out, BLS came up with this news report where there are 9.3 million job openings, right? People are not able to find, companies are not able to find workers, but most of those jobs are in low-wage sectors, right? If you look at them, they're in leisure, hospitality, food. People just don't want to work for $12 an hour. So
true. There's a dislocation that's clearly happening at that end of the spectrum. But before the pandemic, that 9.3 was 7 million. And so there were still 7 million openings when we had full employment that people couldn't fill. And there, I don't think it was as skewed toward the low end, because obviously that's before we had sort of the great exit from the workforce from in the service sector. And so I think there's a healthy component, Zeynep, of jobs that are going to require higher skills. And then, you have the issue of trying to hire into the lower skilled. It's like there aren't enough people to do that are going to want to do it. And so you're going to have to figure out, how do you solve for that? And it's going to be with coming up with alternatives to hiring people, right?
I oftentimes ask people, would you consider a retail job to be an unskilled job? Because this unskilled in quotation, because it definitely is not, or low value added. And then I say, well, the median wage of a retail employee is $13 an hour, and median wage of a Costco employee is $25 an hour. So clearly we can do so much to improve the existing jobs, and then we can do so much to improve the skills of work. So we have to work on both of those at the same time. I want to come to just one initiative that Prudential has that I'm super excited about. Oftentimes when the pandemic and what has happened during the last year revealed not just economic injustice, but also racial injustice in our country. And of course, these are correlated. And, we all remember MLK's, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I have a dream, and his dream always included that economic justice as well as racial justice. But when I look at, when I give presentations and I ask audience, do you have a DEI initiative in your organization? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, almost everybody raise your hands. And then when I ask, and this is awesome, this is great, it's progress. And then when I ask, do you have an initiative to look at the lowest paid workers in your company and look at how they're doing? Almost no one raises their hands. But if you were in that room, you would be raising your hand, because Prudential just committed to looking at financial security of its workers. Would you tell us a little bit about that? This is with Just Capital.
Yeah, you're referring to the Just Capital initiative. Yeah, so we both sponsored that, and we both invested or helped finance it, as well as co-sponsored that initiative. And it's a very interesting initiative where what it's trying really fundamentally to do, Zeynep, to your point, is it's actually trying to take this issue of equity up to the C-suite within organizations by getting commitments. And, the commitments are not really a very tall order. So we're hopeful that there are lots of companies that will undertake to do this, because it's really, there are 3 choices around how you can survey or engage with your employees, to get different readings around, sort of their health, their financial health. And so that's all that's really required to join the initiative, is to agree to do that. Then obviously, once you've done that, that gives you information to act on. Now, in our particular case, we're not a big employer of the very low end of the income spectrum, the minimum wage employees, but we have, a range of employees, just like any company does. And we have, to the examples you gave, customer facing employees like in our call centers. And there, we've our more enlightened approach with that as we've thought about, and particularly in the pandemic. So the pandemic helped to accelerate, what was thinking into action for us. Which is, if you think about those call centers during the pandemic, volume went through the roof, right? Because everyone's calling because they want to know about their policies, and, whether it was their retirement policy, their savings, or their insurance or otherwise, we have a skyrocketing demand. And then incidentally, a bunch of countries as a result of COVID shut down. So many of your multiple locations for call centers all of a sudden were shut down. Entire countries shut down. And so your workers couldn't even get to the workplace. And so you had to get creative really fast in order to be able to handle the volume of calls that were coming in. And so we introduced a lot of technology and bots that could help to divert traffic away from the call center to solve for people's questions that we were getting, that we could, we could do through technology instead of having to speak to a human being, so that we could get the call volume down to an amount that people were able to manage, particularly because, during a crisis like this, the individual, once they got on the phone, they needed to spend time on the phone with the customer. We wanted to create a better customer experience, give that call center operator more time with the customer. So we've taken that even further, where we're trying to enable them with technology that allows them to do a whole series of solutioning for the customers. When they get them on the phone, it's not like, okay, call this number in order to ask about, whether you can increase your policy by $100,000 or something like that. It's like, well, actually, I can help you with that now. So it's a matter of now you sort of talk about, okay, if you take that worker, what are they worth now? Right, when they're creating a whole different customer experience, or even helping to solve customer problems. You can create. We're creating this kind of hybrid workforce where it's not just sort of administrative processes, but it's also, customer engagement. And that creates a different value proposition, which allows you to elevate and pay more for those kind of positions within the organization.
Yeah, but you just highlighted two big benefits of investing in that workforce, right? One of those benefits you highlighted was differentiation. You're solving your customers' problems, right? If you can do that better than your competitors, if you can create a great value for your customers, then you're in the business. And then the other thing that I heard you say, Rob, is adaptation. This is one of the videos, Patrick, I think one of the first person experience, he talked about how their company handled quite well and they were able to adapt. But it seems like in your case, having a workforce that is invested enabled you to adapt to the changing needs. Now you're working from home, you can use these technologies. It's not like technologies come and they're so easy to use. You need workers who are
absolutely. They need the skilling to do it. And so we've stood up something we call the accelerator within our company, and it's essentially it allows people to do an assessment of their skills. So we take their resume of experiences and we translate it into a resume of skills. We then take every open job that we have within the company, and in addition to that, have taken the jobs of, quote, the future, where we see we're going to have needs in the future, and we've translated those into, again, an application of skills instead of an application of experiences. And then we have the artificial intelligence that matches the two, identifies what percentage overlap you have, and then if there's a shortfall, if you're 90% of the skills, go apply for that job. You can do that. If you're at 80%, you need some upskilling. If you're at 70% or lower, you're going to need to be reskilled. And then we offer courses that help people to move from where they are today to where the job openings are today and in the future for the company. I think if companies take that kind of mindset about their talent, which is, we know we're going to have needs, we know we can't hire our way out of these needs, so let's invest in the technology today, including the technology that's going to skill our employees to make them relevant, and so sustainable careers for them, but to help us remain relevant in the marketplace.
Yeah, but then you create careers, right? Not just jobs, with people who will stay with you for a long time. I want to just point out one thing that you had said before, because one of the questions is about living wage and how do we make sure that people are getting a living wage? Because one thing that you mentioned is that you're not hiring, you don't offer minimum wage jobs, but you are still going to look into the financial wellness of your employees. And what we have found at Good Jobs Institute is we've done a living wage analysis for large companies, for small companies. And one of the things that we found when we did this analysis is when executives see what percentage of their frontline employees, especially the full-timers, we oftentimes just do this for full-time workers, are not able to make a living wage, there's silence in the room. Because I don't know about you, but I haven't yet met an executive who would rather offer, poverty level wages and inhumane conditions. They would like to provide good jobs if they can. So seeing those data can be super helpful to create awareness of what's going on in your company.
Absolutely, and that's why that Just Capital initiative of elevating it up to the C-suite brings it up to a level of attention that, to your point, leadership isn't always as in touch with the dynamic that may be happening throughout the entire sort of workforce, and particularly for large organizations. So it's an opportunity to that's why we supported the initiative. It's not, data always helps, and then presenting the data to the right audience can then oftentimes lead to an appropriate set of actions that can make a difference.
Yep. The most recent question we got was, how can we encounter the trend of recent high school grads taking $15-hour jobs, but losing out on the post-secondary skills for the future?
Yeah, so not a simple answer to that question. I would say that that we shouldn't be overly biased on post-secondary education in the traditional standpoint. I think one of the challenges that we face is that much of our economy is geared around trying to get much of our public policy is geared around trying to get more students through the four-year college experience, and then from there graduate experience even. And in our current economy, I put the emphasis on skills versus degrees, and I think we need to recalibrate that, because there are even individuals with 4 years of college, or in the case of one of the interviewees, 2 courses shy of a graduate degree. Which is the worst of all worlds, because then you don't have the degree and you have all the debt that might be associated with having, borrowed to pay your tuition, et cetera. um, they may not at that point be relevant, be able to find the sort of employment that they need unless they've got skills that are relevant to the workplace. And so I'm a big believer in liberal education. I'm also a big believer in skilling. And I think it's a complement of the two. And so, yeah, I think there's a need for post-secondary. I think in one of the current administration's bills, it's, trying to create more access, not just K through 12, pre-K through 12, now pre-K through 12 plus 2. I think those sort of initiatives will help to, extend education to the point where people can have a more solid foundation getting into the workplace. I think we're supportive of those initiatives. I know we're supportive of those initiatives, but I think we're also supportive of the idea that, grants from the federal government need to be more broadly applicable to not just 4-year degrees, but to, the kinds of certifications for skillings that people need to do who may already have a 4-year degree, but need to get some level of re-education, reskilling in order to be, competitive in the workplace.
Yeah, several companies have eliminated those degree requirements, and they're able to attract a much more diverse workforce and very capable workforce without those degree requirements. So I think they would be in agreement with what you say. One of the listeners is asking, or viewers, how realistic is the possibility of shifting from depending on one big employer to teaching people to have multiple income streams? So this is an issue that's that many Americans are facing.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm well qualified to answer that as someone who's had one income stream their entire career. There is the phenomena of gig work, which, maybe that's what this is referring to, is multiple income streams, as contrasted to the multiple income streams someone's holding down 2 jobs because they're low-paying jobs that have to be combined together in order to make economic sustenance. I don't think we want to encourage that, but we may want to encourage more mobility and flexibility in the workforce. I think that to unlock that, you have to have a benefits structure that works differently than it works today, right? So the gig workforce is largely locked out of benefits. And so you need to think about how benefits, which have been traditionally in our country delivered through the workplace, extend beyond that. So they're done in a more inclusive way, in a more integrated way, and in a portable way, so that as people are going between jobs, they keep those benefits as well.
Yep, and we have a couple other questions, but maybe I'll ask you, Rob, about what you're seeing as you painted a pretty depressing picture of the American workforce and what they're experiencing with financial resiliency. How many Americans have been left behind? Do you have any hope that we will get to a stage where we have a strong middle class again and people have hopes for their futures and their careers?
I am actually quite optimistic. I think the level of focus on this is something that, at least in my memory of a fairly long career, is greater than we've ever seen or experienced before. And it's a convergence of many factors. And so we've had, sort of racial incidents which have put a lot of attention on the racial inequity that we had. We've had a pandemic that led to a recession, which has put a lot of focus on the socioeconomic inequalities that we have. And as a result of that, I think the demands from all constituents, whether they be employees, they be communities, they be investors, they be the public sector, for transparency, visibility into this, I think is likely to hold companies much more accountable than they've ever been before. And I think companies are beginning to embrace this broader concept of stakeholder capitalism as opposed to simply shareholder capitalism. You've seen that come out of the business roundtable. Now, I think there's a difference between saying something and doing it. I get that, but I think this focus, whether it be around visibility from the SEC into ESG. And including in that ESG, the demographics of your workplace and ultimately compensation spectrum of your workplace. I just think, and what you're seeing from, many of the big index investors that are pressuring companies to do the same. I think there's a lot of more accountability, both interest in and accountability for this. So I'm actually optimistic that we will see change. And so while I think looking back is a fairly depressing looking picture, understanding that actually has been educational, and I think positions us to a point where we can have a much better future. It gets back to we can prepare instead of repair for the next crisis.
And I hope that will be the silver lining of this pandemic and the racial injustice issues that we have been all talking about. But if you really do care about these issues, having workers who don't make enough to support their families should be unacceptable in our society, right? Investors should be asking for more, companies should be offering more. It ends up hurting workers, our communities. It ends up hurting democratic capitalism, and we can do so much better. And thank you for your efforts to improve things from Prudential, and we hope to see you more in future conversations like this.
Thanks, Zeynep. Enjoy talking.
Same here.